Today we're going to be talking about building encounters, and we're going to cover a wide range of topics from what is an encounter to chases and races, which are all words that Mark came up with. And I think they're good words. Thank you for joining us on Game Mastery today. I'm Steve.
I'm Andrew.
And I am Mark.
So, Mark, take it away. What is an encounter?
An encounter is basically any time the adventuring party meets opposition, right? So you're encountering opposition, and then something's going to happen, and ideally that's been somewhat planned because we're talking about designing it.
All right. So within an encounter, Andrew, how do you visualize that when you're putting it into a game?
Well, I think first you need to focus on what the goal of the encounter is. And of course, the goal is determined by the overarching story that you've sort of set for your adventure. The goals of the encounter might be to reveal additional information about the game world or about future encounters. It might be to merely deplete resources available to the adventurers to make the next encounter a little more dramatic. So it may be sort of like a support encounter. And then there might be a final challenge, or maybe a mid-level kind of boss-level challenge that the encounter's purpose is.
Now, Mark, I know that you've got in our notes splitting encounters between combat and non-combat. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, so you've got basically two basic types of encounters. You have encounters that are likely to lead to combat, non-combat encounters, and the non-combat encounters can essentially be divided into two categories. You have, I'll call them discussion encounters, where there's going to be some diplomatic discussion going on. And then another non-combat, or at least primarily non-combat type of encounter, is a chase or a race. That is the most underused type of encounter, in my opinion, but I think they're a lot of fun.
So I was thinking about the chase and race encounter because of what Andrew had said about what one of his favorite movies is, which I believe that was Ronin. Is that correct, Andrew?
Yes, fantastic. Robert De Niro. Great film.
And it has an incredible series of what I would consider a series of chases that are integral to how the story and the characters move from not just one location to another, but one point in the storyline to another. Is that fair?
Yeah.
So in that particular case, very much so, you could use something that you're already familiar with in another medium to kind of lift that and put that into an adventure as an encounter. Have you done that before?
I don't think I've ever actually done that before. I don't think I've managed it, but I was hoping Mark would step in and say, yeah, my chase and race thing. I do that all the time.
I had never seen, I still have never seen the movie, so I have no comment as to lifting that, but I think movies could be a great source of inspiration for chase scenes, but I have not lifted any chase scenes from movies, although that's a pretty good idea.
Okay, I'm going to loop us back a little bit because I kind of let us go in a direction there and we kind of skipped some steps.
Yeah, we got to go for the outline first.
Yeah, I mean what people may not understand if they are GMing for the first time or if they're new to it is that your story, the adventure that you are putting the characters into, if it's something that you are conjuring yourself, if it's something that you're producing and you are giving the players, you have to realize that this narrative that you create is essentially just a series of encounters. If you think about the books that we read, they are chapter by chapter, in some cases, these encapsulated encounters that are very definitely split between the two kinds of combat or some kind of physical interaction and non-combat, diplomacy, speaking, character building, things like that. And so within the construct of the game, in order to have a successful campaign, you have to understand that the encounters are what drive the action and the storytelling forward. So with that, you have a huge, the overarching outline of where your characters in your story are going to start and where you hopefully, where they will hopefully arrive at the end if they complete this adventure. And then within that are these little subcategories of encounters. And each one of these encounters has its own kind of outline, which Andrew touched on a little bit. And Mark, would you like to say something more about that?
So basically, whenever you're building an encounter, right? So you're just setting it up. I think the first step is to determine what your opposition will be. So I think a lot of times the best way to do that is to see what makes sense to be there. You know, if you are in a dungeon, obviously you don't want an overland monster to be there. That wouldn't make any sense. So whatever makes sense to be there, I think that's a good place to start. And then the next step that you're going to want to do is you're going to want to figure out what the goals of your opposition are, right? So a lot of times I think GMs make the mistake of, you put a monster in a dungeon or wherever you put it, right? And then it's just like, okay, that's done. They're going to fight this roper or whatever it is, right? And I think that's sort of a mistake. I think you want to look at what your opposition's goals actually are, right? Do they want gold? Say, bandits on a road. Are they afraid of the PCs coming through? Do they just want to escape? Are they hungry? Do they want a meal? Are they trying to defend their territory? Like, what is their goal? And then the secondary part of that is sort of how bad do they want that goal? At what point is that goal no longer worth pursuing? So you really want to find out, like, at what point these monsters are going to retreat or otherwise give up in a combat encounter anyway. And I like to define that as, at 50% hit points, 25% hit points. If it's, money, how much money do they want? Are these monsters going to begin to retreat when their leader falls? That sort of thing. So that's really the main thing. You want to find out what your opposition wants and when they're going to stop wanting that and decide on something else. And then obviously, like for any sort of thing, you need to decide the rewards and the consequences of this encounter. So, what happens if your PCs win? Do they get to pass by? Do they get a monetary reward? Do they get an ally? Etc. And then also, obviously, what happens if they lose? Are they going to be captured, killed and eaten? Are the enemies going to just leave them to die in a non-combat encounter? Are they just going to be denied entry to somewhere? After you've decided what is going to happen in that encounter as far as those things I just went over are concerned, I think at that point, then you actually worry about the nitty-gritty of setting the challenge level, adjusting stats, numbers, all of that stuff. The most important part of your encounter, in my opinion, is everybody's motivations and what happens with winning or losing.
So I like that. And before Andrew jumps in with anything, I had written a note about one of the problems that I have with so many encounters over the years in so many games. And this isn't just tabletop pen and paper role-playing games, but this is computer games as well. And that is the opponents having a lack of realism to their actions. And always this full steam ahead, just damn the consequences. We're going to continue to fight until we die. And granted, there are encounters where what you are up against, if it's a combat encounter, where something is driven to that, depending on, the situation. But it's those motivations that help take the encounters from just being a very one-dimensional. I know that every time we enter into combat, it's a fight to the death. It's the same thing over and over. Or there's something more to it, and the outcome is not always the same. It's not always decided by who ends up walking away. Andrew?
Yeah, I don't normally start at the micro level when I'm thinking about encounters. I don't start with the encounter and the motivations of the NPCs that are being encountered. I start more with how does this encounter, what's the purpose of this encounter in the overarching story? Where does it fit in? And that's whether I've written the adventure or even if I'm working from a published adventure. I want to understand, why did the author put this encounter here? Is it just filler? Is it to deplete resources for a future encounter? Is it to provide the PCs with some more information so that the story can sort of unfold? Those questions advise what the NPCs that are actually engaged in the encounter, what their motivations are. I think that defines when they're going to break off. That defines on whether they're going to fight to the death. That defines whether it's going to be a sort of a guerrilla hit and run type of tactic, and how that fits into the overarching story. At the end of the encounter, I would like my players to be thinking, why did we do that? What was the larger picture? What's the bigger picture, instead of just this immediate, we're going to kill something, we're going to be murder hobos and steal from their corpses. I think that understanding the broader picture is important to having a richer environment, a richer world.
Absolutely. I think that you found the secret first step that I forgot to address. Like, that is really where you really start if you're going to put an encounter. I guess I jumped ahead to whenever you'd already figured that stuff out, but great point.
I think there are also sort of two possible ways in which the story can be driven, and that is that the player characters may be active drivers of the story. They may have their own goals, their own desires, their own objectives that they are moving forward to, so they are engaging with a purpose. They're seeking out information, or they're seeking revenge, or they're choosing their actions, and they're the hunters of information or of NPCs, but they're driving the story. And then there's another way in which the story may unfold, and I think it's less powerful, and that is to have the player characters be the recipients of the action. They're the ones reacting to a constant bombardment. They are not driving the story through their own will, but they're in a position of having to react to the NPCs driving the story. I think that's a little less powerful, maybe a little less satisfying for the players. Sometimes you have players that don't have the initiative to drive the story, and all you're left with is driving it with NPCs. But that dynamic is something that you sort of have to weigh out for where you are.
I certainly think that, both have their uses. Obviously, right? Like, if for some reason in this situation, you're trying to induce terror in the players, right? Where the goal is to survive and they have to endure something, then in that situation, obviously, you're going to want the opposition to be the one aggressing and driving it against them. Obviously, in a more traditional campaign, though, I agree with you. I think it is more powerful for the PCs to be moving forward, to have their own goals and be driving the plot.
So the concept of putting the players on their toes and taking some of that and buzzword that we keep going back to, in other conversations, agency, to take some of the agency away from them and force them into a reactionary posture. There's a fantastic episode of the Battlestar Galactica reboot. It's episode 1 of the reboot after the miniseries. And what's happened is that they have escaped the Cylon threat. For those of you who don't know Battlestar Galactica, imagine humanity in another star system, and a race of robots rise up and kill their masters. People escape to the stars. There's this episode where what's left of humanity, and we're talking, I don't know, maybe 50, 60,000 people, I forget the number, they are escaping, and they think that they've gotten away. And that's where the miniseries ends. And then the first episode of the actual series is called 33. And the reason it's called 33 is because they are on a 33-minute clock. Every time they jump out to a new location to try and escape, 33 minutes after they arrive, the Cylons show up. And this goes on for days. And they are hounding the humans. It's harrowing. They can't rest. Everything they do is reactionary just to stay alive. And it creates this incredible tension in the episode where people are desperate. And I think sometimes, and I'm thinking of this from a player's perspective, as opposed to you two as the DM in this case, that when certain choices are taken away from me and I have to scramble to try and figure out a solution because it doesn't seem that I can get away or I just can't, fight off the onslaught, it may not be, Andrew, I think you said that it's maybe less exciting or fulfilling, to have those kinds of encounters. But I do think that if used judiciously, that it can break stagnation in the game and create some really delicious conflict.
I think you've hit on an important point here, which is that actually what makes encounters exciting are decision points. The more decision points that the players have, where they are able to make decisions that matter, directly relates to how exciting the encounter is. In a combat encounter, this is sort of taken care of for you, because combat by its nature has a whole lot of decision points. What spell do I cast? How do I attack? Where do I move? All that sort of thing. In non-combat situations, that becomes a little more complicated, because you want to set up an encounter. In a lot of non-combat encounters that I have seen, there comes a point where the players and the opposition, like the conversation sort of hits a deadlock. And really what you want to do as you go through that is follow the same construct that I talked about for combat encounters. You want to know exactly what they want, what the opposition wants, and exactly when they will give up. Because if you're deciding that sort of thing on the fly, sometimes that can be difficult, and it can lead to these situations where no more decision points are being made, and instead the players are scrambling for something to say that will actually mean something and change the situation. So I think whenever you're designing an encounter, a very important thing is to just try and maximize the number of decision points for the players.
That's a good point.
So in the case of this episode example that I gave, the decision points for the characters on the human side ranged from interpersonal to things that would affect the strategic outcome of battles. So even though they were constantly hounded and there didn't appear to be an out and they are despairing, it actually comes to something that Andrew's got in our notes, and that is to always leave an out within an encounter. Right, Andrew?
Yeah, you don't want, as a DM, to trap the players in an unescapable situation where it's do or die without putting some of that control over their death in their hands. You will have players resent you for that. Now, that's not to say that they can't die, but you want their death to be because of their decisions, not because of some unforeseen, blind sort of trap that you've dropped them into that is inescapable. They need to, their final act needs to have agency. They need to have agency in their final act.
I like that.
It's a good point. Them having agency, I think, is important at all times. Even if, in some ways, right, at certain points, you do have to railroad players to an extent. I think that the less that you can do that, and the more freedom, the more agency, the more decision points that they feel that they have that matter, the better the encounter, the adventure, and the campaign.
So I had mentioned before we started recording about this ridiculous game called Flappy Bird, and it is essentially a side-scrolling game that was insanely addictive, and the only thing that you did was basically hit a button to make the bird fly up or fall down if you didn't press the button. And you are side-scrolling through increasingly difficult terrain. And there is no out. There really is no out. But the joy of it comes in seeing how far you can get. And that means that the people playing the game had hope. They had hope that they would do better than before. They had hope that there was an outcome of some kind of reward, even though, it was an impossible situation. And there may actually be times when you are playing the game and it is an impossible situation. Characters may have gotten into an impossible situation. But if you're a DM who plays like you are against the players and not providing an adventure for the players, then I've known DMs that put people in these situations where they don't have any hope, and it kind of drains the fun out of the game. So when you all are doing an encounter, do you all have a Kobayashi Maru? Do you have an unwinnable situation that you put in front of people so that if they step in it, they're screwed? Or is there always an out in these encounters in your minds?
Well, there's a certain point where if they make a certain decision that, yes, that will lead to certain death, right? And I think we talked about this last episode where, players will sometimes make ill-advised decisions that will lead to their death. But they did decide that, right? So at some point they will hit that point. But in general, right, what you want to do, right, is they could have made a different decision at that point that wouldn't lead to certain death. And I think that you bring up another thing, which is with the NPCs. We were talking about when do they retreat? When do they give up? Decide that it's better to do something else? That can be a real problem for players, because players are like suicidal narcissists. They just go and they think that every battle can be won, and they will not retreat frequently, and then they'll find themselves in an impossible situation that they got through their own decisions. I think that providing early on situations where the foe is too tough, where your players are forced to retreat, I think that provides a certain level of fear, hopefully, that will cause them to actually act more realistically and retreat whenever they should, to know that they can get their toes into something that's way bigger than them.
Yeah, I think that using some literary devices like foreshadowing, I think a lot of novice DMs they don't want to give the surprise away, but it's actually more powerful if the PCs are given lots of clues that disaster is ahead, and they ignore the clues and plod on, or they dismiss them, or they misinterpret them. And then when they do finally step into it, and the DM has been more than fair in providing signals that bad things are going to happen if you persist, when the PCs have their wake up moment, it's like, oh man, yeah, that is that visceral experience is much more satisfying for the players, I believe, than having something blindside them.
Absolutely. You have to, that was a great addition there, because you absolutely have to let the PCs know in some way that they are making decisions that are leading them to doom. If you don't give them any clue, then it doesn't feel fair to them, and it actually isn't fair. I would agree with them.
Typically, when I'm describing a dangerous area that they're about to enter, I will give signals that there's death ahead. Like, there will be corpses strewn about. There will be a bad stench in the air. The forest will be silent. Just little signals to say you need to be cautious that for your next actions may be your last.
Right, yeah. Add the C-3PO. I've got a bad feeling about this.
Do you know, I was thinking about this, C-3PO might be my favorite character in Star Wars. It's taken me almost all of my life to admit that to myself, but I think he's my favorite, oddly.
Interesting choice.
Yeah, I've been...
The protocol droid, the one that sets the behavior rules, is Steve's favorite character in Star Wars.
Well, when you put it that way, Yeah. Well, sorry for that non sequitur, but it was tangentially related, and I didn't bring it up. So,
And I don't know where we want to insert this next bit, but I thought that we may want to discuss a little bit about the cyclical nature or the roller coaster nature of the storyline. That essentially these encounters are leading in some suspense, the encounter itself, the resolution, some celebration or lamentation, and then the recovery and the build up to the next encounter. And that cycle repeats itself where you've got these highs and lows, and depending on where you are in that cycle largely shapes the next encounter. If you're at we've just finished a long rest stage, then you're going to want to have a few encounters to diminish the PC's resources, to make resource management, the decisions to cast that spell, use that magic item, burn that scroll. Those decisions made in those early encounters are going to affect future encounters. And so where they are in that cycle, that has more weight.
You are correct.
Yeah, that's a valid point. That's actually probably something I don't do enough, except in dungeons. I tend to make a single harder encounter that challenges them just, overall to the max. Because I don't like to fill up my story with too many encounters unless they're going into with too many combat encounters. Unless they're going into, a dungeon or exploring a dangerous wilderness or something like that.
I like to have my PCs to be below 50% hit points before they engage a chapter boss fight. So I will ding them with small bandit raids or random goblin encounters in the hallways, things that they perceive as easy. But the wizard has now burned 3 first-level spell slots. They've used a couple healing potions to recover and get back up to health. So when I've got them down to about 10 or 20% of, on average, their hit points, I throw another encounter at them. And I don't introduce the boss fight until they're at about 50% resources.
I think
maybe I'm just a sadistic GM, but the reason I do that is so that they have to make more critical decisions on resource management throughout the game. And if they fail the fight, it's because they burned resources inappropriately early on.
I think that is probably the optimal way to do Dungeons and Dragons. And I think that the fact that I prefer to run the other way usually is part of maybe why I hack my games so much, because I'm trying to make the game fit more what I'm trying to do. But I think that, if you're playing it by the book, that is absolutely the way to do it.
So I don't know if you guys, well, Andrew should remember, but this is the sound of paper shuffling through pages. The first time that I started thinking about encounters and the adventure, not from the player perspective, was a long time ago. And the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons Dungeon Master's Guide was an incredible resource for storytellers. And it had complete sections on one on page 47, The Adventure, and it covers adventures in the outdoors, land adventures, population density affecting chance of encounters, frequency of encounters based on land type, and time checks throughout the day. I mean, this thing was thick with variables.
AD&D love tables.
Oh my God. I mean, it was incredible. And it's even got, things in here for forced movement, if you are being pushed by the DM and you can't rest. And all of these different variables to go into an encounter to make it more rich and more realistic. And I know Andrew had said something about terrain and how terrain can affect player action and responsibility. Would you like to talk about that for a second, Andrew?
Yeah, one of my favorite stories is that of Thermopylae and the Spartans at Hell's Gate at Thermopylae defending against the Persians, and their use of terrain as an effective strategy. And I like to incorporate that in my game. I'm not opposed to theater of the mind, but I really like working from a grid or using the movement rules. I think that was one of the big benefits of 3.5 and 4th edition, was this chessboard-like atmosphere for the combat, because it gave value to their movement rate and where they chose to be. Board position was important. Do they have higher ground? Are they able to stop enemy advancement? Are they going to get hit by flanking? Are they vulnerable to attacks of opportunity if they want to move? And how is this movement going to affect the larger story of perhaps losing the information or losing the MacGuffin of the story because they're not able to keep up? You can take a very simple, I can wipe out a 5-player NPC level 5 party with a half dozen goblins of inexperienced players if they're not familiar with board position. And it is a wake-up call when they wander into a bunch of goblins and think that this is going to be cake, and 6 goblins shred them.
I think that in combat encounters, I think that it's very important to consider the terrain. I've noticed that, a lot of battles that you'll see with an inexperienced GM, they will just have, okay, here is the room in the dungeon. It is flat. There are some walls, okay, and here's the monster, and you fight it. And I think that adding in terrain, especially terrain that makes it, well, so there's two ways I think to approach it. One is that you provide weaker monsters in terrain that is highly advantageous to the monsters, and that will make the battle more difficult, like you were talking about. And the other way is to make the monsters much more powerful than the players, but provide some sort of advantageous terrain for the players so that they will have to take advantage of that to actually win the combat. And even if the combat is even, I think it's very important to include, if you're in a dungeon, the location of pillars, pits, height, just basically anything that can allow a player to make smart decisions and get an advantage. And, this is more the decision points I'm talking about. Whenever your movement matters more than, hey, am I next to the monster? Right? And this includes spots of difficult terrain, other things like that. I think that an encounter can really be shaped by the terrain that you include in it. And I think it's underutilized.
Have either of you seen the movie 1917?
Not yet.
Negative.
So that was 2 no's?
That was 2 no's.
I have it in my queue to watch.
So, and I'm sorry I interrupted you, Andrew. I'll make this quick. 1917, for those of you who haven't seen it, came out Christmas of 2019. And it is a slice of a mission from World War I. And it is filmed in a way that presents it as 2 continuous shots over 2 hours. And if you want to get an incredible insight into how terrain can affect characters and the decisions that they make with minimal combat, but incredible amounts of tension and danger, you should watch 1917. Over to you, Andrew.
Well, I was going to say that it's important, I think, for a DM to train or take the time to educate new players that aren't familiar with a tactical game on how to best maneuver around terrain. I know that our regular weekly group had not played a tactical game that I am DMing, and I try to give them suggestions on what their next move might be. And it's sort of like training or teaching somebody to play chess for the first time. They're just not familiar with the consequences of their actions early on, and it can be demoralizing if they hadn't been thinking that, the creature, this goblin I'm fighting, doesn't take attacks of opportunity. It can disengage, and it can hide, and I can lose sight of it and not be able to target it back, or that the darkness spell that I cast, the creature I'm fighting has blind sight and isn't affected by that. Those many new players, or even experienced players that have only played Theater of the Mind, it can shake them up if you don't take the time to sort of walk them through some of the optimum moves that they need to be considering. It's only been, I guess, just a few months of us playing, and already the players are much more adroit when it comes to the combat. They are thinking about flanking. They are thinking about escape routes. They're thinking about being able to protect their casters. They're thinking about preserving their resources. And so they quickly pick up the little skills they need, but it does add a totally different, a deeper level to the game than what is available in just a Theater of the Mind game.
Certainly, and I've got nothing against Theater of the Mind, and I think that you can honestly do similar sort of things in Theater of the Mind, but like once you introduce a grid, or gridless with minis, however you want to do it, once the visual tactical element is introduced, you can certainly add a lot more depth to your combats, for sure.
I agree. Yep.
So, Mark, I see in your notes that you have written the blank room. Could you talk about what you mean by that?
Covered.
That has
been covered. The
blank
room is whenever I was talking about, You walk into a dungeon room. It's a flat, basic room, and there's a group of monsters, and you fight in a blank terrain where it's flat and there's nothing going on.
Oh.
And I think that basically for every encounter, that's a mistake. You want to have something going on with the terrain that is blocking arrows or doing something at least a little bit interesting.
It is so rare that I play in a game where terrain matters enough. Even in a stereotypical tavern situation where you might have a combat, the idea of the terrain within that venue becoming integral to how you survive that encounter is often just left to the wayside. Now, I will say that for those groups that I play in that actually use miniatures, that use a map, that they are more apt to think about those things and actually put them in as barriers than people who are playing without that kind of tactile element.
I think that any sort of terrain thing, like, where somebody climbs on the table, where a bar patron picks up a chair and hits somebody with it, where basically anything else matters outside of, what you don't want, in my opinion, is you don't want the players just looking at their sheets, deciding what spell they're going to cast or who they want to attack, and not really worrying about their movement outside of, how many squares away is it. You want something else to be going on to sort of spice up the situation, because, combats, as many decision points as they have, can get repetitive and old if everyone is the blank room.
Yeah,
or if even most of them are the blank room.
One strategy that I really enjoy, and I haven't implemented in a while, is the ticking bomb, and merely putting some kind of scenario where the encounter has to be resolved within a certain time frame, or there is going to be some kind of loss to the player characters. Lose a magic item, an important piece of information will be lost, the building will collapse, just any kind of ticking time bomb where they know that they've only got a certain number of rounds to complete this encounter. That can add a totally different kind of environment to the encounter.
I agree. Yeah, that's its own sort of terrain using time.
So, not just the encounter. We've kind of emphasized combat encounters, but when you're building an encounter that is not combat based. Let's say it's a meeting between two warlords who are vying over a piece of terrain, and in the valley below is a peaceful village, and that village is agrarian, and they just want to live their lives, and the party's coming through, and the party has to decide what they're going to do. Are they going to choose a side as they're passing through this area because they can't get through without becoming embroiled in the conflict somehow? And are they going to, do an A-team? They're going to go in and they're going to help the unfortunate villagers against both sides, or whatever. How do you construct a non-combat encounter to break things up within the story? Are those easier for you two than the combat ones, or are they harder?
I like to leak information about the world and the overarching story a little bit at a time. I don't think that many times my players even pick up that the little details that I'm providing shape the way the world works, that it gives them insight into what's going to be encountered in the future. Typically, those non-combat encounters are either preparation for a more physical encounter, or they are designed to direct the players to give the players control over the action. They're going to provide information, and it's going to give them choices to do in the future. So in the scenario that you built, the first encounters might be with the tavern owner discussing how this, the taxation from these warlords was driving them out of business, or how the tension between them was actually building business for the wheelwright down the road, because he's now building siege equipment, and he's able to feed his family for the first time in months because of this added business. I typically try to shape those encounters around revealing something about the world in which they're in.
For me, I try to view non-combat encounters very much like combat encounters. Like I said, you're trying to... So each party in this non-combat encounter, in this discussion encounter, is going to have a goal, right? And so each step they take is going to forward that goal in the conversation. For example, look at any conversation in a novel, okay? What you don't have going on is... Okay, we'll use your example with the warlords and the piece of land, right? So, in that discussion, what you'll never see in a plot is Warlord 1 says, hey, look, give me this piece of territory here, and I won't attack you. And then the other one says, okay, that sounds good. Right? The way it works is Warlord 1 says that, Warlord 2 says, it's like a haggling thing. It's like, okay, well, I'll give you half of that if they're at a disadvantage, or they say, okay, I am going to no, and you can't have any of it. In fact, I want this piece of land, right? So whatever is going on, there is never an agreement. It's like a haggling situation. Even in a basic conversation in a book, you're not going to see a conversation happen where both people just straight up agree. They say, oh, let's do this. And the other person says, okay, let's do that. There's always going to be a piece of conflict, or at least, a separate opinion located in that. And I think that is the key to designing interesting non-combat encounters. And at some point, they're going to reach an agreement, hopefully, or it suddenly becomes not a non-combat encounter. One of the two will happen.
I think that you can make your world seem bigger and more detailed if you break up what would be one encounter into 3 or 4 encounters in different locations. And so you provide some of the story advancement in one encounter, and the NPC involved suggests that the party go to someone else who has additional information, and in exchange for a small task, will provide them the next bit. They accomplish that with little difficulty, and it can be leveraged into a resource depletion strategy. And then they return, and that NPC gives them a little tiny bit of information, and then suggests they visit someone else. They may end up back at the original NPC, but you can chain the NPC encounters, whether it's in a city, a community, in the mountains, and have them go to these different areas, talk to different NPCs with different motivations, jump through different social hurdles to acquire the information, and it becomes a chain of social puzzle-solving encounters. And that's typically the way I run my social encounter hurdles.
I wish that I call it the Elder Scroll formula, because the little bitty steps in order to get to the large outcomes are something that's baked into the Elder Scrolls series of games. Skyrim, for instance. And
I may have unconsciously picked that up from you.
You're saying that, and I'm like, well, that sounds like Skyrim. And it sounds all the way back to their first game, I think back in 1994, Arena, that was the first one that I played. I guess in a computer game, I'm used to those elements, those story elements that carry you through from narrative bit to success to eventual, hopefully intended outcome. I consider them in the electronic world tedious because I can't affect the game in a way that distorts that pattern. It's completely on rails. I can go on side quests. I can opt not to do this. But in order for me to reach my objective, there is no way to do it without nibbling a little bit at a time with these things that are parsed out to me within the game. And I believe that there are two things with what you're talking about. There is the ability to, as you said, make your world larger by breaking an encounter into multiple smaller pieces to stretch it out and give it story, and maybe in some cases give it more relevance and gravity for the time that's involved. But I have been in situations with tabletop where people do that, but there is, that go back to agency again, there is no opportunity for the players to make decisions that disrupt that on-rails pattern. Do you see what I'm saying?
I think that the advantage of doing it live with a DM, as opposed to having something pre-scripted in a computer game, is that a good DM, and maybe I'm not a good DM, but that they can give the illusion of choice. So that I could give you multiple paths to advance, and you get to choose which path you take, but it doesn't matter which one you choose. You'll end up with the same information regardless of what choice you make. And so if you decide to help the dwarves fight off the warlords, then you will end up with some information that would advance the narrative. If instead you choose to help the warlords defeat the dwarves, then at the end of that, you end up with the same information that would advance the narrative. The story evolves in a different way, but sort of circles back to those key nodes that fit the much larger arc. I think you can open up your world a little bit and allow the PCs to make decisions and move around the world freely, and then you just relocate some of your content. For example, if your PCs need to speak with the blacksmith, but they refuse to go visit the blacksmith and instead visit the alchemist, well, you just move the content to the alchemist. The same critical pieces of the narrative that were going to be provided by the blacksmith can now just be provided by the alchemist. The critical information that the PCs needed to advance the story is still provided, but the way they got there differed. Do you feel cheated?
No, because I understand that an illusion of choice, when done effectively, is indeterminable by the players from actually having choice.
Do you really think you have free will?
Well, there's a can of worms, right?
Oh boy, there's You're
no different than your player character, Stephen.
Oh, you know that whole thing about the brainwave actually showing your decision before you're consciously aware of the decision that you've already made?
Yeah.
You know that study? Yeah. And that's reflected in, I guess, new things with quantum states and all of that great stuff. So I may have complete free will, but I may not be aware that I have the free will that I have because of the way that. No, I'm not even going to go down that road. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. I struggled with this since I was old enough to realize I was conscious. So thank you for causing me nightmares tonight, because usually...
Well, there you go. You want to stall your computer, you ask it to play tic-tac-toe. You want to stall Stephen, you ask him about free will.
Thanks. Appreciate that.
I've got a simple answer. Just, I'm going to do what I'm going to do. I know that doesn't answer anything, but that's my answer.
And you're compelled to give it.
I am. I'm just going to do what I'm going to do. And if that's fate and that's pre-decided, whatever. I'm a do. I'm a do.
I'm a do. I'm a do. One word. I'm a do. So now that's going to be in my head. Thank you for that, because that'll help blunt the fact that Andrew has ruined me for the evening. So I'm so easily ruined. It's amazing. We can edit that out. But
It's your show.
So if we were going to sum up what we were talking about to this point, it's that these encounters and this information that are meant to carry the game along can be considered modular. And they could have their own buckets or drawers or boxes or however you want to think about it. And so rather than getting stuck as a game master when something doesn't go either according to the script if you're running a module or according to what you've got mapped out in your head for something that you've put together, you need to be able to look at it freely like an artist who is okay with editing and know that with just a little bit of work, you can take those things, remove them, and stick them in somewhere else, and the players will be none the wiser. Fair?
Yeah, I think it's important that the DM be humble and recognize that the story is not theirs alone, that the story is a collaborative effort being told by the DM and the players, and it's being told largely by the players, so that as the DM, you're providing them opportunities to advance the story. You're not trying to push them in a direction necessarily. You're just trying to keep the story moving by providing them opportunities for action.
And I will say the active encounters and active bits of story that carry things forward are very, very, very dear to me. I like those things a lot because I don't like there to be a lot of downtime for me in an encounter. I like having to make decisions quickly. It may not seem that way based on how I speak, but that is true. So I'm very intrigued based on that as to what Mark wanted to say about chases and races for encounters.
Like I said, chases and races, they are dramatically underused. So the way you would set one of these things up, for example, a thief pickpockets the PCs, right? Someone's assassinated. Anything like that can initiate a chase. And a chase, there's two ways to resolve it. One is the boring way, and that is to just see about speed, just have terrain, go through it, and it kind of ends up being a boring encounter. I don't know if any of you guys have ever tried that, but it kind of sucks. So here's the way that you do it, in my opinion. Let's take, for example, someone gets assassinated, all right? So, and you're trying to find the perpetrator, the guy who assassinated him. So how do you handle this? So your assassin already has a head start. They ideally had some sort of height, or they were in some hidden spot or whatever that was away. So your PCs are going to go off chasing him, all right? So what you do is you divide your terrain. So let's pretend this happens in a town. You're going to divide this into stages rather. So let's say it starts in the crowded marketplace, right? Then there's you'll have various stages, such as the back alley, a side street, a dead end with a fence, rooftops, whatever you want to make, right? And each one of those gets defined as a stage. And then at each stage, make sure that there's something that the perpetrator can do. They can jump the fence, they can tip over a cart, they can scare the horses, there'll be an easy place for them to climb up to the rooftops, whatever it is, right? And then also, there's going to be the options that the PCs can use, right? They can try and take a shortcut around. They can try and cast some sort of spell that'll slow them down. They can try and get a clear shot with the bow to maybe hamper him. They can steal somebody's horse and jump on it, chase after them, and whatever. So what you're doing here is basically you are setting up these stages, and each stage, there are decision points for what the perpetrator can do that you've decided beforehand, and what the players can do. And the players will surprise you, of course. They'll come up with different things, but you're going to let them do that. They get an action, and the perpetrator gets an action. And what you'll do is you'll have a sheet of paper. You determine, sometimes with ability checks, various methods that you'll decide on how much the PCs catch up, fall behind, etc. And then at a certain point in one of these stages, either the PCs will have caught up with them, and they tackle them, they take them down, they somehow catch up, and there's a social or combat encounter. But also there's a spot where the perpetrator can get away. And then, just like any other encounter, everyone's going to have their motivations, there's going to be rewards and consequences, but essentially the trick is just to track it by stages, and you can make a very exciting narrative just by doing it that way, and you don't have to generate a huge amount of terrain and then calculate speeds and whatever. It's really all about the decisions, which, as I've said before, is what makes encounters exciting. And chases are sometimes like the best encounters.
I think some of my favorite science fiction and fantasy moments in books and movies and anime actually follow a combination of chase and race, where there is an objective that requires the party to move quickly. And whether it is escaping that initial story element or trying to pursue another.
Right, you can switch the roles too. The PCs can be getting chased as well as being the ones chasing. And the same stage elements you can use for an actual race, if there was some sort of race competition or, like what you're talking about. All of this stuff can be tweaked to fit a lot of different situations, but the key is the stages and the tracking of it and the decision points.
Star Wars Episode 4, the beginning of that is a chase, and it is also throughout the movie a race. It is a combination of the two, and of course based on a Japanese movie, but it carries along because there is this kind of dual track of the chase on one side, the race on the other, and then at a few points it kind of crosses over. And the crossover points are actually very interesting if you run a story that has encounters like that. Those crossover points where maybe there's a swap between who's chasing whom and what prompts that could be very exciting.
Yeah, I agree. That's, there's all kinds of twists that you can provide to this basic formula. And like I said, you almost never see them in D&D or other role-playing games. And I don't know why. I think that using the basic stage framework, construct entire adventures along that basic framework if you wanted to.
I think starting out for some GMs, even after they get experience, the trap of falling into these flat encounters, these blank rooms, it's an easy trap to fall into because it's convenient and it doesn't take a lot of thought, and you're tired with the story, you pepper it with, you come across X. And you have a battle, and that takes up time, and then you move to the next thing.
Chapter 8 of the DMG has a section on running chases that might fit well with Mark's comments.
Oh. The 5th edition DMG? I don't have a copy.
5th edition.
Oh, I don't have a copy of that.
Page 252, actually.
Oh.
Cool. I actually haven't read through the advice in the DMG because I've been doing it for so long. So
yeah, they allow, one of the mechanics that they use in the DMG is to let people repeatedly use the dash action, but they're limited to 3 plus their constitution modifier. So after you've done 3, if you don't have a high constitution, after you've done the dash action, you have to make a constitution check or you have to pause. You gain a level of exhaustion. To affect, so somebody that's maybe not as fast but is more fit could outrun someone who is faster or catch up to someone who is faster.
Yeah, that's a good approach to incorporate in that. Yeah.
there are some incredible supplements out there for people to look into that kind of put these things that we're talking about down into actual encounters and blueprints. And this GM Gems Volume 1, it's kind of neat. They've got all of these different contributors, and for instance, getting there is half the fun in talking about the transit in order to get from point A to point B. You know, you've got people that are talking about looking at caravans, which caravans are usually a convenient thing whenever I've encountered them in a fantasy game, where it's, there's a caravan of goods, it's a Silk Road situation, there, might be some traveling merchants.
Oh man, we can do an entire episode on travel.
Absolutely. And I think we should.
Yeah, toss that on the list.
Ta-da! It's on the list. I just hate thinking about new GMs getting caught in that flat trap. It just really, I hate that so much.
Oh, one more point that we may want to cover is my little Deus Ex Machina sucks. So for those not familiar, was it the Greeks? I guess the Greeks had a commonly used dramatic component where the gods would come in on a chariot and save the day at the end of the battle. They would mechanically drop the actor who was playing the god onto the stage, and the dramatic device became known as God from Machine, or Deus Ex Machina. And essentially it is this notion that the resolution of the story is that the gods come in and fix everything. And that the lesson to be learned from that is that it's an unsatisfactory end to the story. Don't save your players if they deserve a good death.
Going back to Skyrim, huh?
Am I? Oh, yeah. He does. It's a good death, right? So
Yeah. The Deus Ex Machina is such a irritation in so many works of fiction, where you have this resolution that happens, or this thing that comes in. In our world, it's people who've lost their ideas or lazy writing. At the time, I'd like to think that, given the world at that time, especially in ancient Greece, where they were pushing the boundaries of what they knew about the physical world, and they were trying desperately to make what they observe mesh with what they could not see. And so, there's questions about how much the ancient Greeks actually did believe in the gods, and when that belief started to wane, and how it affected their society and all of that. And you had these schools that would push the boundaries of what that belief in the unknown was. But for people at certain times with a certain level of knowledge about the world around them, that Deus Ex Machina coming in was not a ridiculous solution to an impossible situation, but was something that was kind of believable as something that could happen. But as we have progressed in our knowledge of the world around us, those kinds of solutions really seem hollow, I guess.
Yeah, I just recently, within the last few months, was part of a campaign. We were all 5th level. There were 4 of us, and cleric, wizard, monk, and a paladin. Good, well-balanced group. We came upon a goblin ambush, went in, the monk charged right into the midst of them, was immediately taken down because each goblin gets to disengage and retreat and open up the next one, and they all took a swipe at him, and enough of them hit him to take him out really quick. We were going to wipe. The DM had a high-powered wizard come in and kill them all, I was so frustrated with the party because I'm a tactical kind of player, and it was a little disappointing. But even in that kind of situation, I felt like I wanted to play it out. I wanted to see how it would go. I was still thinking that we may be able to, to escape, to do something, and it was robbed from us because the DM thought, oh no, this is a disaster, I've got to intervene. And he should have just let us all die.
Yeah, there's worse things than TPKs.
Right. A bad story. Way worse.
Bad story.
Way worse than TPK. All right, gentlemen, is there anything else that you'd like to say?
What about balanced encounters? There's a lot of material on balanced encounters.
Absolutely. So, in that particular case, when we're talking about these encounters, and whether they are combat, non-combat, whether they are on the run, or whether they are holding up, how do you, as a dungeon master, make sure that those encounters are balanced? Now, part of it is if you are running characters of X level and so many number, and you're using a module, those modules are supposed to take all that into consideration for you. Now, it doesn't always work, but it's supposed to take it all in.
It never works.
So how do you adjust without giving it to them and without making it an impossible situation?
Well, there's two issues in balance that you need to consider. One is the balance between the players and the NPCs of the encounter. But there's a second balance issue, which is probably equally important, that we can handle separately, and that is the balance among the players. If you have an imbalance among the players, you have one super PC, then the rest of them are going to just dread every encounter that you engage in. But when it comes to balancing between NPCs and PCs, I say my habit is to forget it. Just pick something from the same tier. Get it close. It doesn't have to be exact. If it's too powerful for them, they will retreat. Somebody will die. They'll be creative as long as you haven't boxed them into a corner where they can't escape. If you leave an escape route for them, if the encounter's too much for them, they will escape. Somebody will escape. If the encounter is too easy for them, then you wait a little while, let them explore, and then use it as a resource depletion tool. Don't panic about an unbalanced encounter. You can just spend too much time trying to nitpick it. I wrote scripting and simulations and stuff. You just forget it. You can't.
How about you, Mark? How do you handle that in your games?
Where I start, like I said, is a lot of times what makes sense to be there.
Yeah, that's very important.
Sometimes that's too powerful, and sometimes it's really weak, and sometimes it ends up being, right on. Like I basically agree with Andrew here. You don't want to put the PCs in a situation that they can't get out of, but sometimes it's actually valuable to make them have to get out of a situation.
I get such a bum rap, in my opinion, for living because I retreat. I've only played one character that had the motivation to needlessly put himself at risk regardless of the odds. But I sure have played with a lot of people who think that that is the defining characteristic of being a hero. When you're talking about an unbalanced encounter and don't worry about it, if it's too powerful, someone may die, but people will retreat. Maybe I need to look at that if I'm going to GM as, in the perfect world of the players that I want to have in my game, that they learn from mistakes and learn that maybe retreat is not such a bad thing.
Yeah, if they don't retreat, they will the second time.
So I think that, honestly, the default that you can expect from a player is that they will not retreat. They will assume that every encounter is beatable. And if you're the GM, they'll give you hell about it. And that's the life of a GM. But I think it's important. You kind of have to train the PCs that it's okay to run. Because sometimes You just walk down a road that you weren't ready for. And they have to retreat. And I think it adds a lot more dramatic tension to a game where the players know that they can do the wrong thing. And they can come up against obstacles that they're not up to beating right now. That the world exists beyond them. And like I said before, players are basically suicidal narcissists by default. They don't think they can lose, and they're going to fight till the end, and you have to kind of train them out of that.
Yeah, well, and I think you're also battling against this concept of intermittent reinforcement. Some of the most the most satisfying encounters are usually the ones where they are almost dead and then start rolling real well, a couple crits, and the tides turn. And I've been in so many campaigns, so many encounters where I thought, 1/3 of the way through the encounter, oh, this is going to be a TPK, and the party has prevailed. And they were so, there was a high five and woot woot kind of moment when they did that. And now, and that, of course, that feeds the recklessness for the next encounter. But I think that, yeah, if you try to save them, you're depriving them of the joy of pulling it out right at the, escaping the jaws of death.
That's absolutely true. Couldn't agree more with that.
Thanks for joining us on Game Mastery. You can always check us out on anchor.fm/game-mastery or follow us on Twitter at mastery_game, Instagram at Game Mastery Podcast, or Facebook and YouTube at Game Mastery. If you'd like to ask us a question or get some follow-up information, maybe submit a topic for the show, please email us at rpg.gamemastery@gmail.com. And we'll be back next week for more information to make your games better and to make you a better game master.